One of the best things I've done with the highest return on investment is learning how to utilize speed learning. The memorization strategies and hacks to download information into my brain fast. And that's quite a big deal considering I graduated high school with below average grades. However, at university, I used those speed learning strategies to graduate in the top 5% of my class relatively easily without putting too much effort in because I was studying smarter rather than harder. And without a doubt, the single most effective speed learning tip for you that will make your learning firstly easier and secondly you'll process information more efficiently is to utilize curiosity-led learning. If you take anything away from this video, it's this. In order to retain information efficiently in the long term, that information needs to have meaning. It needs to have relevance to your life. So how do you do that? You let your curiosity lead your learning. So memory coach Jim Kwik uses what he calls the MUM method, which he teaches in his Kwik Student program. The M stands for motivation because you need a strong reason to remember something, because if you can't come up with a reason, you won't remember it. This could even be, this nugget of information will probably come up in your upcoming exam, so it's important that you learn it. The O stands for observation. So memory issues are usually attention issues, not retention issues. When you're learning, make sure you are actually paying attention and being present in the moment. The M stands for mechanism, and this is all about using memorization strategies and learning how to learn. For example, I studied economics and finance at university, and one of the topics we were learning about was GDP, gross domestic product. Now here's the difference between my approach and most of my classmates' approach. Most of my classmates would go straight to the textbooks or straight to Google and just search for the term GDP, right? And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but in my opinion, it's just not the most efficient way to learn. The way that I would go about it is I would use curiosity-led learning. So I'd list out a series of questions that naturally made me curious. So for me, these could be what countries have the largest GDP? So I'm relating the theory back to real life. What countries have the lowest GDP? So what are the poorest countries essentially? And how is GDP measured? And then I'd probably go and watch a documentary on YouTube on the topic, because watching documentaries, at least in my opinion, are far more interesting than reading thick, heavy textbooks. This speed learning method is so powerful because it takes advantage of your natural curiosity, meaning that you're not learning things that you were forced to learn, but rather you're learning things that you want to learn. So what will then happen is your studying will become more effortless. You won't have to drag yourself to your desk to study anymore, because you'll be learning things that you genuinely find interesting. And believe me, if you're studying for an exam where you find the topics interesting, it's so much easier to achieve higher grades with far less effort. Note-taking versus note-making. A very important component to speed learning is actively processing the information you're consuming. So note-taking versus note-making is a term coined by memory coach Jim Kwik, and the name encapsulates the process perfectly. So when you're taking notes, whether you're taking notes from your textbook or you're taking notes from your lectures, then you need to not just copy down the information word for word, exactly how it's written in the textbook, or exactly how your lecturer explained it. A far more effective and smarter way of taking notes to force your brain to process the information rather than just passively record it is to first simplify it as much as you can. So by simplifying the information, you're making sure you truly understand the concept. If you're not able to simplify it, then the chances are you don't really understand it on a deep level. It's what the late theoretical physicist Richard Feynman taught. You should be able to break down and explain complex topics in very simple sentences using just basic terminology. If you're unable to do this, then there may be gaps in your knowledge. Now, I've mentioned memory coach Jim Kwik a few times on this YouTube channel, and for good reason. He's one of the OGs of speed learning, someone that I personally have learned so much from over the last 4, 5, 6 years. That's why I partnered up with him for this video to introduce his Quick Student program, which is essentially a 30-day program on how to master speed learning. He basically teaches you how to learn efficiently so you don't have to be studying 10, 12 hours a day, so you don't have to be pulling overnighters, so you don't get stressed out every time an exam is approaching. It took me years of learning how to learn before I enrolled at university, and because I did, I was regularly achieving the highest grades in my class because I knew how to process and retain information very efficiently. With the Quick Student program, you have one main lecture a day for 30 days, and each lecture is accompanied with a worksheet, so you're learning by doing, not just watching someone talk, because that's how you learn, right? By actively engaging in what you're learning. So if you are a student and you want to study more efficiently as opposed to just studying more hours like a lot of students do, then I really do recommend you check out the Quick Student program. I'll drop a link in the description below for more information. Principle of most effort. It's easy to trick yourself into thinking you know the topic. It's called the illusion of competence, but recognizing a topic is very different to understanding it. The easiest way to test yourself to know if you actually do understand the topic on a deeper level is if someone asked you to explain it in depth. You should be able to explain it in very simple terminology. Again, as theoretical physicist Richard Feynman once said, if you cannot explain something in simple terms, you simply just don't understand it, and that's very, very important. So there is a very strong correlation between the effort you put into learning something and how long you retain that information. So the more effort you put into actively thinking about something and asking questions and taking notes, the more of that information you move into your long-term memory. It's what I'm going to call the principle of most effort. Is based off the principle of least effort, which is a broad theory that states that us as human beings are inherently lazy and will always naturally choose the path of least resistance or least effort. And it's the same with animals, right? A lion isn't going to try and take down the strongest wildebeest in the herd, right? It's going to choose the weakest and slowest. So the principle of most effort is going against what is natural for us, and everything that we read, everything that we watch, we make a conscious effort to process that information, including, by the way, this video, because the more effort you put in, the more you'll take away from it. So I have a client that I've been coaching for maybe the last 7 or 8 months. She works in finance in London, a really smart person, and she has quite an interesting approach. She only watches one educational YouTube video at a time. And I think that's the opposite to most of us, including myself, honestly, because she'll watch that one video and process the information and sit on it for a while and think about it and maybe take some notes. And that way, she's able to remember long-term all the information in that entire video. And that's a perfect example of utilizing the principle of most effort. Strategic downtime. This is something that I realized for the first time at university. Most students go home at the end of the day and chill out in front of Netflix or spend the rest of the day browsing through social media. And that's fine, right? We all need downtime. However, I realized that many of the high performance students, their downtime would be far more strategic. So for example, I used to play football quite a lot at the end of the day. Firstly, to unwind and relax. Secondly, to socialize. Thirdly, to get in some exercise. So I was essentially hitting 3 birds with 1 stone. And that's the difference between just normal downtime and strategic downtime. Another example would be going to the gym and listening to a podcast at the same time, right? You're chilling out, unwinding, and exercising at the same time, but learning at the same time also. It's a very efficient use of your time. Now, I'm not saying you should never turn on Netflix, because sometimes at the end of the day, I do as well, but I'm saying that you probably shouldn't be watching Netflix for hours every single day, but you should be far more strategic with your downtime. So I've made quite a few speed learning videos on this channel. One of the fastest growing videos on this channel that I just uploaded recently is Train Yourself to Learn Like Einstein. You can click on the card on the screen to watch that. Alternatively, I made an entire speed learning playlist with about 10 speed learning videos. If you watch all of those, you're going to be a force to be reckoned with, you really are. And do check out this video's sponsor, Quick Student Program, link in the description below.